Everyone laughed when they saw what Marcus had done with $15, a scavenged solar panel the size of a paperback novel, a salvaged battery pack from a dead laptop, wires stripped with a pocket knife and connected by hand. People walking past his spot under the overpass called it garbage, called him delusional. One man in a pressed shirt actually stopped and laughed loud enough that his coffee spilled. But that night, while the rest of that block sat in the dark, Marcus had light and a fully charged phone and something nobody around him could buy with a monthly utility bill. He had proof. You have to understand something before we go any further. The people who laughed at Marcus were not bad people. They were people who had been taught by every institution, every advertisement, every conversation they had ever participated in, that electricity is something you purchase from a massive corporation, delivered through wires buried in the ground, billed to you monthly whether you like it or not. They had been taught that anyone who steps outside that system is either a fool or a fraud. And so when they saw Marcus sitting cross-legged under a highway overpass with a handful of components that cost less than a fast food meal, their brains fired the only signal they knew how to fire. They laughed. But here is what those people did not understand. What Marcus understood, not from a textbook, not from an engineering program, but from months of quiet study, of reading discarded library books and watching instructional videos at the public library before closing time, was something so simple and so ancient that it predates every utility company on Earth. The sun produces energy. That energy can be captured, and captured energy stored correctly is power, not metaphorical power. Actual, measurable, usable electrical power. The knowledge was never lost. It was just sold back to us at a markup. So, before I tell you exactly how Marcus built what he built and what happened after, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where the electric bill arrived and you felt a specific kind of helplessness? That sinking feeling where you realize you have no choice, no alternative, that you are completely dependent on a system you did not design, did not agree to, and cannot escape. Drop that in the comments, because what you are about to discover is going to change how you think about that feeling entirely. That helplessness was not natural. It was manufactured, and the solution was available the entire time. Here is the thing about modern electricity access that nobody in the energy industry wants to talk about. The barrier to entry is not technological. The technology to generate usable electricity from sunlight has existed in accessible, affordable form for decades. A 5-watt solar panel, the size of a hardcover book, small enough to carry in a backpack, costs between $5 and $8. A USB boost converter module, the component that takes raw voltage and regulates it into something a phone or LED light can actually use, costs $2 to $3 online. A salvaged lithium battery from a discarded laptop, the kind that sits in landfills and recycling centers across every American city, can store enough power to charge a smartphone 3 to 4 full times and costs nothing if you know where to look. The total investment built from scratch with purchase parts sits between $12 and $15. Built from salvage, it is closer to nothing, and yet the average American pays roughly $150 a month, $1,800 a year for electrical service, not because the technology demands that cost, because the infrastructure does. The poles, the wires, the meters, the billing systems, the maintenance crews, the corporate headquarters, the shareholder dividends. You are not paying for electricity, you are paying for the delivery system. And if you cannot afford that delivery system, if you are one of the roughly 582,000 people in the United States who are unhoused on any given night, you are simply told you have no options. That is the lie Marcus refused to accept. He had been sleeping rough for 14 months. When he built his first setup, he had worked construction before the injury. He knew tools, he knew materials. He knew that a wire is a wire, regardless of what building it is installed in. And he understood one other thing that most house people never stop to consider. When your phone dies and you have no outlet, you do not just lose entertainment. You lose access to shelter hotlines. Job listings, medical appointments, the systems that are supposed to help you get off the street all assume you have a charged phone, and a charged phone requires electricity, and electricity requires an address, and an address requires money, and money requires a job, and a job requires a phone. You see the problem. And here is something even more specific that most people never hear about. On Skid Row in Los Angeles, documented observers have found an informal economy around phone charging. People pay $2 to charge a phone. $2 for the same unit of electricity that costs a housed person roughly 3 to 4 cents at the wall. That is not a pricing anomaly. That is a tax on having nothing. You are poor, therefore you pay 50 times more for the same resource, not because the electricity costs more, because your access to it has been monetized by the only people positioned to sell it. Marcus knew this economy. He had paid into it. And the morning he finished his first panel and converter circuit and watched his phone climb from 4% to full without spending a single dollar. Something shifted in him that was not just practical, it was philosophical. Here is where it gets remarkable. Marcus did not just solve his own problem. He solved it so visibly, so demonstrably, so undeniably that he could not keep it to himself even if he wanted to. The first time someone stopped to ask rather than to mock, it was a woman named Diane. She was also sleeping under that overpass. Her phone had been dead for 3 days. She had missed a call back from a temp agency. She had missed 2 shelter lottery slots. 3 days without electricity had cost her, concretely and measurably, opportunities that might have changed her situation. Marcus showed her his setup. He explained each component the way someone explains a thing they love, slowly, with patience, pointing at each piece: the panel, the converter, the battery, the output cable. She charged her phone in 4 hours. By the end of the following week, Marcus had helped 4 other people build their own versions from salvaged parts. He had become, without any title or credential or institutional backing, something between an engineer and a teacher. But let us talk about the actual science, because this is where it goes from a story about one man to a lesson that belongs to everyone. A photovoltaic cell, which is simply the technical name for the surface inside a solar panel that generates electricity, works by doing something that sounds almost impossibly elegant when you understand it. When a photon of light strikes the surface of the cell, it knocks an electron loose from its atom. That loose electron does not just float away. The cell is designed, through layers of materials with different electrical properties, to funnel that electron in one direction only. And when millions of these collisions happen every second, you get a stream of electrons all moving the same way. That stream is direct current electricity. It is, at its most fundamental level, just organized motion. Think of it like a crowded hallway where everyone is walking in random directions. That is chaos. It produces nothing useful. Now imagine a single narrow corridor where everyone can only walk one way, the same number of people, the same amount of energy. But now it is directed. Now it moves things. That is what a photovoltaic cell does to photons. It takes chaotic light energy and turns it into organized electrical motion. The panel Marcus used produced roughly 5 watts of power in direct sunlight. That is not much by household standards, but a smartphone requires between 5 and 15 watts to charge. An LED light, powerful enough to read by, consumes 2 to 4 watts. What Marcus had, in practical terms, was a device that could charge his phone and light his space simultaneously from a panel smaller than a piece of notebook paper. Not a power plant, not a revolution, just enough. And enough, when you have nothing, is everything. Now here is the part that should make you genuinely angry. This technology is not new. The photovoltaic effect was documented by French physicist Edmond Becquerel in 1839. The first practical solar cells were developed in the 1950s. For more than half a century, the knowledge that sunlight can be converted to usable electricity has been available to anyone who looked. And for most of that time, the cost of the necessary components has been dropping steadily, dramatically so in the last 2 decades as manufacturing scaled and efficiency improved. A solar panel that cost hundreds of dollars in 1980 now costs single digits. The technology became accessible. The knowledge did not follow. Because accessible technology, widely understood and independently deployed, does not generate monthly revenue. The utility industry is not in the business of your energy independence. It is in the business of your energy dependence. And so, the mass education that should have accompanied the collapse in solar component costs, the community programs, the vocational training, the public demonstrations, the high school physics classes that should have ended with a student building a working charger from $10 of parts, never arrived. Instead, rooftop solar was marketed as a luxury home improvement for homeowners with good credit, and everyone else was left staring at a bill they could not afford and a system they had never been invited to understand. The knowledge got packaged, priced, permitted, and placed out of reach, not by accident, by design. Marcus had never been invited. He invited himself. The thermoelectric discovery came later, and it changed everything about what was possible after dark. Marcus had noticed that on cold nights he kept a small fire, just a candle in a tin can, enough to cut the chill. And he had read in a battered electronics hobby book he found in a donation bin about something called the Seebeck effect. The principle is simple. When one side of certain materials is hot and the other side is cold, electrons move from the hot side to the cold. That movement is current. That current is electricity. Peltier modules, small ceramic tiles about the size of a postage stamp, sold online for roughly $2 each, exploit this effect directly. Press one side against a heat source, keep the other side cool, and they generate electricity, not much. Roughly half a watt to 3 watts depending on the temperature difference. But combined with his solar panel, running through a shared battery, Marcus now had a system that generated power by day from sunlight and by night from a candle flame. His electricity never fully stopped. He called it his grid, his own grid. $12 of components and a library book. If you are finding this valuable right now, if something in you is waking up to the fact that the barriers you thought were technological are actually institutional, do yourself a favor and share this. Because this information should not be locked behind a paywall or buried in a technical manual. It belongs to everyone. So why did nobody teach this? Why did the simplest and most accessible form of personal energy generation never become common knowledge? 3 reasons, and they are not complicated. First, speed. Industrial scale energy production is fast. Flip a switch, generate gigawatts. Small personal solar builds take time, thought, and hands-on assembly. The industrial model won because it scaled. Second, cost, not to you, but to industry. A world full of people who understand solar panel basics and Peltier modules is a world full of people who need the grid slightly less. Slightly less need multiplied across hundreds of millions of customers is a significant revenue loss. And third, the arrival of cheap grid electricity in the mid-20th century made the whole conversation feel unnecessary. Why learn to generate your own power when the outlet is right there? The outlet was right there for people who could afford a house. For everyone else, the outlet was always someone else's property. The hidden cost of that bargain is now paid by every person who has ever sat in a dark room because they could not cover the disconnection fee. By every unhoused person who watches their phone battery drop towards zero, knowing that the next shelter bed depends on receiving a call they may not be able to receive. By every family who chooses between heating their home and feeding their children because the utility bill arrived the same week as the grocery bill. 1 in 7 American families lives in what researchers call energy poverty. That is not a technology problem. It was a decision. Now, let us talk about what you can actually do starting today, regardless of your situation. If you want the easiest possible entry point, buy a small solar panel and a USB boost converter. You can find both on any major online marketplace for a combined total of $10 to $15. Connect the panel's positive and negative leads to the converter's input terminals, standard red to red, black to black. Plug a USB cable into the converter's output, set it in a south-facing window, or take it outside. That is it. You now have a phone charger that runs without a utility connection. It will not power your refrigerator. It will not heat your house, but it will keep you connected. And connection, as Marcus understood better than anyone, is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. If you want to go further, add a salvaged lithium battery pack between the panel and the output. Wire the panel to charge the battery, and wire the battery to power the output. Now your system stores energy during daylight and releases it on demand. You have graduated from a charger to a power bank, a discarded laptop battery, which you can find at any electronics recycling drop-off. Typically holds enough charge to power a 10-watt LED lamp for 3 to 4 hours after dark. Your total investment is still under $30. You now have daytime charging and nighttime lighting. You have, in functional terms, the same two core utilities that define basic habitability: light and communication, powered entirely by the sun and a candle flame. Your total recurring cost is zero, and if you want the minimum, if you are not ready to build anything, but you want to be able to identify the real from the fake, the functional from the theatrical, learn to read one number: wattage. Any solar panel rated at 5 watts or above will charge a standard smartphone. Any panel rated below 3 watts will charge so slowly it barely keeps pace with the phone's standby consumption. As wattage is the only number that matters for basic function, everything else is marketing. Look for it on the label. If the product lists lumens instead of watts, it is a lighting product, not a charging product. If it lists milliamp hours but not wattage, ask for the conversion. Wattage is truth, everything else is packaging. Marcus eventually moved out of that encampment. It took another 8 months, a temp job, a housing voucher, and a lot of the kind of luck that should not have to be luck. But he left something behind. Not the panel, he took that with him. He left the knowledge. He had written down the parts list on a piece of cardboard and taped it to the support column where the encampment gathered. A $12 bill of materials and a diagram drawn in black marker. Some people photographed it, some people built it. Some people laughed at it too, but the ones who built it had light that night. Marcus was not a miracle. He was not a symbol. He was a man who understood something fundamental about energy, about sunlight, and about the gap between what is technically possible and what the market bothers to tell you. He was an engineer who happened to have no address, and he engineered his way forward with the materials available to him. He did not wait for permission. He did not wait for a program, a voucher, a nonprofit, a government initiative, or a tech company to notice his problem and develop a solution with a subscription fee. He picked up a library book, read it, and built the thing. The only thing useless about his $15 setup was the label that got put on it by people who had never had to think about where their power came from. The knowledge was never lost. It was just never handed to the people who needed it most. If this story lit something up in you, subscribe. We are here every week, pulling apart the systems that were supposed to work for everyone and somehow only seem to work for a few. We are looking at the gap between what is technically possible and what we were told was available. And we want to know from you, what system do you want us to investigate next? The water access crisis in rural communities, the hidden economics of food deserts, the medicine that never got distributed. Drop it in the comments. We are listening. And we are not done.